Welcome to the Westside Personalized Podcast, where real educators share their classroom-tested, learner-approved personalization practices. I'm your host, Andrew Easton. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion and are able to find a few valuable takeaways from the podcast. And so without further ado, let's go to the pod! All right, welcome back for another Westside Personalized Podcast video. Really, this time we're going to probably cover a couple different mediums here with this. And I'm getting a chance to visit today with Michael Fryda, who's energetic and fun, loves playing games, which is what we have here before us. And so I'm really looking forward to Michael getting a chance to share what games and personalized learning and just kind of a lot of the cool things he does in his classroom meet. And so to begin with, though, if you don't know Michael, I want him to give you a little bit of an introduction about just kind of history and education, years experience, the classes you teach, and where this game kind of comes in to your current coursework.
Well, we're going to start off today with sort of the coup de grace of the games that I have in my classroom, because I have games at various different levels in my classroom, from simple all the way up to ridiculously complex. And I'm excited about ridiculously complex because it has the possibility of giving us some ridiculously complex learning. And so that's an exciting goal for me, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But this is my 15th year at Westside Community Schools. I've been teaching this course for the entirety of that 15 years.
Wow.
And our philosophy with this course has always been that this is a team effort. We're going to work together. I've had a wide variety of teammates over the course of that 15-year period, and every single one of them has made the course better. And so our philosophy is that we really mean teaming in this course, and that means that we want to do everything that we possibly can to craft something that we're going to have ownership over, that the kids are going to have ownership over. And so we've had a lot of success working together on these sorts of things. And so this is for the natural science course here at Westside High School. It's a course that is 9 through 12. It's a course that is designed to help to support students who need a little bit more extra support and to see a pathway to success in science. And part of the reason why I love teaching is because I love to take a student who needs that extra support and is maybe a little down on what's been happening in school up until this point, and really show them that they can be successful, and that science is the reason why we teach science in school is because we want great problem solvers in our society. Is the reason why we teach science. And so this game in particular is designed to model the style of problem solving that is going to need to happen in order for us to solve arguably one of humanity's greatest challenges, global climate change.
I appreciate that you start off with why, because that's something that sometimes we get so caught up in what we're doing and how we're doing it, that to really invest in that, like the core of this is to reach some of those science students and learners who maybe are a little apprehensive about that, or like you said, maybe not had a positive educational experience, maybe particularly in the sciences. And so certainly what better way to do that than a game? And I think that's kind of getting to your how here, right? How do we start to engage people in real world situations? And games can certainly do that. I know there's a game designer, Jane McGonigal. I'm maybe getting that crossed up with Harry Potter.
Right.
Jane McGonigal.
There you go.
It's Jane McGonigal. Edit that out. But Jane McGonigal has a TED Talk where she really advocates for the power of games. And it's not necessarily, yes, they're fun and engaging, but the potential that has to teach us how to create innovative techniques and solutions to problems is the nature of being invested in a game. And so that's awesome that you have, it sounds like, that vision in your why and how this game plays out for your natural
sciences.
And that's
really, I think, is something important to emphasize here at the start. I really consider this to be multifaceted learning. This is not going to be only about the content. In fact, content is only one piece of this. There's also going to be social and emotional learning in here. There's going to be reflective learning. There's going to be different styles of quantitative and qualitative approaches to how we would interpret data. I wanted to craft a game in which, if we're realistically going to be targeting a very difficult problem to solve, we need to really consider the richness of what goes into that problem.
And any good learning experience is going to do that, right?
Absolutely.
That it's not just going to be about knowledge and comprehension. It's going to be about developing teamwork skills and collaboration, and like you said, the social emotional piece, and a deeper level of thinking and engagement in whatever content you're going through, right? And so
can I give you another layer for the why, for the social emotional here? And so this is something that I started doing this year, and this
co-share of
yeah,
this here?
We'll see. Let's make sure we're in frame. Yep, we're in frame. Okay. And so this is the actual visual aid that I use with students very near to the start of the year, in which I always start off my classroom with what pure science is really about how do we think about the world and how do we use rules of thinking to interpret our world. And I think culturally right now, one of the things that we're all just really struggling with is how do we react to challenging facts, scary observations, inconvenient truths. Global climate change is scary, and the purpose of the game is not to scare people. The purpose of the game is for us to do a very serious investigation into some challenges that we have to face. And so this is a continuum that was proposed by a group of people in a book or article. I think that this is from the American Progress Institute, Global Warming 6 Americas, an audience segmentation analysis. And we can use this for any dimension of science, any dimension of any content area this works for, I think. But particularly because global climate change tends to be a hot button issue in our society, that there are a lot of emotions associated with that. We don't want to drown out those emotions in people, because when you don't
objectify it almost to a degree where you're desensitized.
Yeah, we don't want to devalue people's emotions. We've had success in science teaching these controversial subjects like evolution, which and global climate change, which are not controversial in science at all. But we don't want to devalue anyone's emotional reactions to things, because everybody comes with their own lens. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have an evidence-based outlook on what's happening. And so to sort of help students right out of the gate, to prep them for this game, I show them this continuum, and I explain to them one end of the continuum is not right or wrong, so long as you're able to solve problems and so long as you're able to work with people. And so for any particular issue, any individual could find themselves on any part of this continuum, whether they're more likely to take action, whether they're sort of in the disengaged portion, zone of inaction, whether they're more doubtful or dismissive. And we talk about how doubtful isn't bad. It's good to be skeptical about things. Dismissive, well, in science, we want things to be evidence-based, and so we're more likely to dismiss things that don't follow the rules of discourse. And so we want to sort of take the teeth out of the emotion so that it's helping us to reflect rather than hindering us to reflect. Yeah. And so the prep for this game is really prepping people's interactions to controversial topics.
Yeah, so, and I would say, just holding this up too for one more quick second, from a personalized lens, to me this is knowing your learner, right? Yep. And on some level acquiring a piece of data for themselves that they're going to be able to use to understand where they fall and how that's going to impact, I think your word was lens, with which they view the content that the game is going to ask them to think about. And I really like this piece up here because we recently in some podcasts have talked about risk. And a place that I've started to land is that it's less about being a risk taker or being, maybe that's even on its own spectrum, but it's more about developing a rich risk history is the way I like to think about it, and being able to be put into different contexts and to have to face challenging facts. I don't want to call challenging facts a risk, but you're opening yourself up to new ways of thinking, and until you're in the habit of and have a history of being able to do that and think about those things objectively, I guess, to get back to where I was at, we need to create those experiences for our learners.
Risk and learning definitely go hand to hand, and a lot of what we do as educators is to make sure that we are walking that knife edge judiciously and making sure that we have the right amount of risk that will help someone to grow, but not so much risk that it's anxiety inducing and shuts them down. And so finding that balance is really important, but I very much believe that it's on us to make sure that we're curating that and supporting the learner in that. We can't just assume that it's going to happen. We have to model it. So
yeah, and I guess I bring that up to you in the idea that I love that quote that it's a mark of educated mind to be able to entertain an idea without having to accept it. And so I guess the lens that I'm viewing this through is to say that it's okay to entertain other and risk maybe not having the answer or the correct opinion, and at least explore those before you commit to those things, regardless of where I'm at. So cool.
Excellent.
Cool. All right, so you ready for game time?
Sure.
Let's do some games.
Okay,
so after a little camera angle switch, are we ready to play?
We're ready to play.
Okay, walk me through this thing, because there's a lot of stuff on the table here. Climate change.
This is a game that is complex enough that we need to spend a week prepping it before we actually
This video's
play.
not going to be a week long.
This video is not going to be a week long. I'm going to give you the basics. And so The idea behind the global climate change game is we want to have an anchor for students to be keeping track of that is going to be the ultimate deciding factor as to how successful they are in the game. I've been teaching games for quite some time, and probably the biggest axiom of teaching games that I've learned is that you start with where you're trying to go. In other words, how do you quote unquote win the game?
Yeah.
And so the main component of this game that students need to pay attention to is our carbon dioxide meter, because one of many aspects, but probably the main aspect that is driving global climate change is increasing carbon dioxide gas levels in our atmosphere. And so this meter is what we would consider the single most important main game meter that we have in the game, and this is keeping track of realistic numbers for Earth's atmospheric global carbon dioxide levels. And so there's
trouble, right?
Yeah, red is trouble, and,
Okay.
and that's another mentality.
Problems.
That's another mentality that I bring with myself to creating these game components, is that red is a stop sign, green is a green
Yep.
light, and
Yep.
so I always try to pick colors that subconsciously people will associate with good things. So a little later on we'll talk about discussions, and so a great discussion is green, okay? Because
like it.
you
I
know,
like it. Yep.
we want green means go. So this meter starts at 401, which is actually a lower carbon dioxide value than our current carbon dioxide level. And so this is a great teachable moment that when I built this game in 2014, I tried to set it at what would be a realistic carbon dioxide level, and global carbon dioxide is already above this.
Where are we at now? I'm just curious.
We're around the 413 mark.
Oh man, we got to play this
Okay,
game a little
we're
bit
right,
better.
exactly. We need to engage. I mean,
Good.
there is a sense of urgency,
Yeah.
you know, that we need to have for this. So the carbon dioxide meter starts at a certain part, and the way that I help to support the game player in this is that there's all sort of little tricks that I've dropped into the game to help to speed things up. Whether it's like a card that will have tips or concerns for people in discussions, and then on the back of every roll card there's a turn order. This is a good opportunity for us to talk about the rolls. And so basically, in order
And that's what I was
to...
going to say. So we're trying to keep this limited.
We're trying to keep this low.
There are how many people in our game?
There's going to
typically?
be 5 people in our game,
Every time?
but the game supports the idea that we could have a group of 4, but maybe one student who was really into it could take 2 roles, like sort of
Okay.
play 2 roles at the same time. If we have students who need a little bit more support and are a little wary about what's going on, we can have 2 students playing a single role.
Sure.
And so I wanted to build this with maximal flexibility in terms of managing student anxiety, because if we're anxious, we're not going to learn.
Okay.
And so anything that I can do to help whatever the particular needs of a certain student are, it's here in the game.
Okay.
So we want to keep the carbon dioxide meter low, but the game is gonna start with this increasing, because realistically that's what's happening to global carbon dioxide. So the way that basically that a turn order works is that we're gonna have to contend with the consequences of high carbon dioxide. We're gonna make some decisions that will help us to pay to support goals that will work on lowering this meter
Together.
And together as a group. This is a team game.
Right.
We are not playing against
So I'm
each
not
other.
going to try to vanquish you and be...
We're never going to solve that problem with trying to vanquish each other, and so we're modeling, collaborative problem solving here as well. So each group within the game, or each role in the game, as I call them, is a segment of society, and there are 5 segments of society that students can choose how much they want to get into that particular role. Here's some examples. Well, first, here are our 5 roles. The roles are industry, education, the public, research, and government.
Okay.
Okay.
Those are your stakeholders.
Those are our stakeholders in the game. And so, for example, I have the government player card, and you have the research card
I
right
need
now.
to switch out.
Yeah,
Because I'll
yeah.
tell you, I'm not a researcher. I will take the blue education
Right.
card. Am I okay to do that?
Of course.
Just know you're learning.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And that's a really good point, Andrew, that there's total flexibility in terms of how students want to engage with the game. Some students feel very strongly, I want to be in this position. And
Education.
it may right.
Me.
And it may be for philosophical reasons, but I'm going to be honest with you as well. When some students find out that the government is the banker, they just want to be the banker. Okay? And so they start with the government role just because they want to be the banker, but then my job as the educator walking around the room is to get them to think about, well, what would the government think about this particular quandary that we're discussing right now? You may personally have a different opinion, and you can contribute your personal opinion, but what do you think your role would think about this? And so some students really like to get into the challenge of, like, that's the role-playing aspect of this game, that they're sort of deciding, well, gee, what would my role think about this sorts of things? And all the game components, every student is in charge of a different aspect of the game component that sort of matches up what their role would be all about. So, for example, the industry player. Let's introduce another meter, the source sink meter.
Okay.
The industry player is in charge of the source sink meter. This is the meter that decides whether or not our overall global carbon dioxide meter is going to increase or decrease at the end of a game round.
Okay.
We want to get it so that this is decreasing, but this is a realistic problem. Worldwide, carbon dioxide is increasing. So the meter starts at plus 10, which basically means, the sink source meter starts at plus 10, which basically means that if we do nothing at the end of this game round, this meter is going to go up 10.
Okay, so the game round is maybe a class period?
A game, we might get through 2 or 3 game rounds in a class period, and so
gosh, so we could end up like in a really serious.
You could end up in a
serious place.
The game is designed so that if we take no action, bad things are going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, because you have to start the problem solving. You have to incite that.
Yeah, and so I have 3 levels of victory here as well. Students can get a partial victory and a total victory. If they just get the sink meter by the time we're done playing the game into negative territory, that's considered a partial
long-term
victory.
Win.
Well, it's a long-term win. We've worked to begin to lower global carbon dioxide. If they can get it down into the negative 16 through 20 range, that would be considered a total victory because we're getting back into the safe levels of carbon dioxide for our environment.
So industry's in charge of that.
Industry's in charge of this and the reason I chose that is because probably industry has the biggest capacity to be able to do something about our overall carbon dioxide level, because it is industry that requires the energy that we need to produce awesome products for us, this awesome microphone and the camera and all that. We need industry for those sorts of things. Every segment of society has a role to play.
Right.
Okay.
That's why we're in this together to win.
Yeah. More meters. There's more meters, okay? But these are all designed to keep track of realistic aspects of this problem. And so we had just gone through that discussion of are you concerned? Are you
we in
dismissive?
Education are very concerned.
Right. And so we have a meter that measures our level of concern.
We're making games.
Right.
To do the best we can to impact this.
My level of concern for curriculum design is high. Okay.
All right, so tell me a little bit about this meter then.
So the level of concern meter, this is my way into is to get students to inadvertently get an advantage for having more discussions with their peers. Like there's an in-game advantage for having discussions. And so basically when we encounter some of the mechanics of the game, we can choose goals that increase the level of concern meter. Some of our disasters that we encounter in the game, the disaster cards, might raise the level of concern meter, because if we don't care about something as a society, we're not going to do anything about it.
So you might be another way to think of that might be that this is a way to read the social awareness.
Yes.
And the temperature with that at a given moment. Okay.
We want this to be
we
want this to be all encompassing. This is not just about content. This is about us making decisions as a democratic society as well.
Sure.
Okay, so there's social studies aspects in this as well. Nice. The last game round meter is the most complex. Just kidding. It's the one that keeps track of what game round you're on, so that we can know everything that's going on.
After 10, it's over.
After 10 or when we run out of time. And that's another thing. It's a good opportunity for us to talk about pacing for this. This is a big game, and I do not have unlimited curricular time to do it.
Sure.
So I've designed it so that if students are working at it, even at a moderate level, they can get a sense of accomplishment even if we were to run out of curricular time to play it, which almost always happens. But every group works at a different pace. Some groups just bomb through it. I don't think I've ever gotten a group get to round 10, but I also feel like we've always had a sense of satisfaction of what we've accomplished with the number of game rounds that we've been able to do.
So from a personalized lens, just to call a quick timeout, because this is obviously a personalized podcast or website or all these different things. My lens for this would be to say, one, just as I did, there's choice.
Yep.
And once you make those choices, then comes a real-world responsibility, which I think is always great educational practice to be in. Personalized learning is certainly about that. And then for this component, then it becomes about pace.
Yep.
And I like the idea even of let's talk about this a lot, but also don't feel like that should have a negative impact on what we're collectively trying to get done.
We want there to be a little bit of pressure, but not too much pressure.
And so, there are components of that personalized mindset and personalized practices in the midst of this. And so we're kind of looking at how these can be experienced through game, I think. So that being said, are we ready to start round one?
We're ready to start round one. Okay. And so the game starts,
and back to the industry.
And I spend like an entire week modeling this for students just so that they can like know what to expect. And I think that the outcome of that has been that a lot of students are grateful that they've had an opportunity to sort of see ahead what this is going to look like. The first year I did it,
critical.
Absolutely.
Any innovative or like significant leap away from your traditional legacy model of instruction.
And speaking of scaffolding, on the back of every roll card, there's the turn order, so we have everything that we need. The students could go through this entire game not looking at the rule book once.
Okay.
Because the rule book is there just in case, a teacher, wants to check into this a little bit more, someone who might want to use it for their classroom, whether a current events classroom or a science classroom. This could fit into so many different content areas, I think, and be successful. So start off, just like when you cross Go in Monopoly. Everybody gets 2 monies. I call them action points because we're going to use them for action. But, we joke around. We want to have a good time while we're doing this because I'm like, okay, everybody gets your monies. Okay? And so everybody gets their 2 monies. And then we need to see what sort of consequences we have for whatever the carbon dioxide meter is at the beginning of any game round. Okay. So the public player, who is the player who would be most affected by this, and that's why they're in charge of this, is going to start. It says right here on the meter 1 disaster, and then as the carbon dioxide meter increases, we get to 2 disasters, 3 disasters, 4 disasters, loss. Okay, yeah, we don't want to get there.
I've seen movies about that. It's not good.
Exactly, and that's something that we battle in the sciences, as well. Realistic interpretation within movies. And so the disaster cards of the game have a picture of the tsunami from the earthquake that caused the destruction at Fukushima in Japan in 2011. And I made all these game cards myself, and they are basically just laser printed on little clear stickers. And so I have total freedom over like the text, and over time I can replicate these or add new cards to the game, put an expansion pack in there, whatever I want to do, over time. And so the second step of the game is we draw a disaster card, and it will for the group. Okay. And this is something that early on we're going to have to make a decision on.
And so, because it's a little bit difficult probably to see from the camera there, because this says a second, third, and fourth. This is the disaster one.
This is disaster. We start the game having to contend with a disaster because we're already seeing environmental disasters from global climate change right now. Extreme weather.
Is this why it snowed 3 times in April?
Right. Scientists made a mistake in terminology by starting with global warming because it inadvertently started spreading the misconception that we should see all warming all the time. Extreme weather is the realistic thing that happens under global climate change. And so you want me to read a card and see? We'll make some decisions. Yeah. Melting Arctic sea ice results in carbon dioxide trapped in ice re-entering the atmosphere. The Earth warms because loss of a bright surface means less sunlight is reflected back into space. So that's sort of our setup for this. We're sort of getting our content and our issues out by working with all the components of the game. And it's sort of designed that after we play the game, I feel pretty confident that they would have gotten a broad and deep enough exploration of the content. So here's what we have to contend with. Immediately increase the sink source meter by 2. Oh, that's bad.
It's not good.
Now, we do have some choices here. Some of these disasters, like, for example, a volcanic eruption, we can't do anything about that as humans. It's going to happen, okay? Yeah. This is an example of something that maybe we could work on. And so this card says, this card can be canceled for 4 AP, 4 monies, but only if the level of concern meter is 6 or higher. Meaning that this is such a big disaster that unless we're really concerned about it as a group,
And are able to fund it.
That's the only way that we can cancel this one. So at the beginning of the game, that's the other cool thing about this game. This game will play differently every single time somebody plays it, because it's basically just like a luck of the draw or unluck of the draw in terms of the disaster cards of what would happen.
So we got to raise the level of concern.
So we already have our sink source meter up in the plus 12 region. So if we don't do anything, this is going to start increasing, pretty darn fast. So this one we couldn't do anything about, but now we need to start taking steps to do something about it.
Okay.
So next step of the game is we have our discussions, which the purpose of the discussion is not only to get students engaging on these issues and discussing these issues, but also for me to take an opportunity as a teacher in general to model respectful discourse with them. And that's probably one of the biggest aspects of the game that I spend time with at the beginning. They get a variety of visual aids when they walk into the game, and one of them is there will be an example round, and then when they get to the game, on the back of these discussion cards, which we'll discuss in a minute, has some tips and cautions for them as to how to be respectful in discussions, some critical things for them to consider. Now, why are we having discussions in this game? Well, in every game round, the quality of our discussions is going to determine how much money we earn, and the money is going to be used to work towards goal tracking board that will help us to begin to lower the sink source meter and in turn the carbon dioxide meter. So the way that this next step would go is we shuffle the resource card discussions, and the education role, which is your role, is basically in charge of a lot of the reading for things, because we want each role to model what they would do. And so since a big mission of education is reading, this is going to be an opportunity for the education player. I also prep students. I do say to them, because some kids are a little bit more timid about reading in front of their peers. When they first start the game, I'll say to them, these are the 5 roles. This is what each of the 5 roles are required to do. If you consider yourself to be a great model for reading for your peers, please consider taking on the education role, so that way we can get a strong reader who's doing the education role. But oftentimes what we'll see, this has been one of the greatest long-term outcomes of the game, is that students want to drive discussions, and so almost always what happens is that the education player might start with a resource card, but then they just end up bouncing around the board and everybody does a little bit of reading, which is awesome. Gotcha. So do you want to read for us our discussion piece that we're going to use to get money?
Sure. One of the ethical dilemmas of global climate change is individual versus community. An example of this dilemma is the desire of an individual chemical company to make profits and employ workers, balanced by the desire of surrounding communities to avoid toxic chemicals from those companies. Chemical companies build a wide variety of different products that we use in our everyday lives. Poisonous chemicals are often required in the manufacturing of products, and it can be difficult to contain those chemicals so that they don't pollute the environment. People want the products, people want the products made by chemical companies, but they also don't want their groundwater polluted by chemicals. Those chemicals can give people cancer and other diseases. So our discussion questions are, what penalties do you think companies face when they poison groundwater? Should I just read the others?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it.
Why do you think the companies resist these penalties, and would you accept losing your smartphone? Ooh, that's a hard no already.
Right. Well,
if it meant that groundwater wouldn't get poisoned, would you accept an increase in the cost of your smartphone instead? Discussion time would be 5 minutes.
Yep, and so here's how discussions work. So basically, somebody gets to be the timer as well. Normally, it's the research role because, quantitative numbers, and so the research player gets to whip out their phone, okay?
Their smartphone, which we might be getting rid of depending on how this chat goes.
So those questions elicit discussion among students. And, sometimes they don't even want to... You're right. It could be a hard no for a lot of people. So my job as the educator is to be walking around asking additional questions that could maybe, well, would you consider this? Like, what's your part way on this? Is this really a hard no, or are there some aspects of this you'd be willing to accept? And so there's a discussion that happens amongst the table, and I usually encourage them to go one question at a time. On the back of every discussion card, there's some discussion tips and cautions. I'll just read one of each so that people in the audience can get some flavor. So the purpose of the resource card discussions is not only to give us an opportunity to practice social interactions with our peers, but also for within the game to earn money that we can use to start working towards our goals of lowering the sink source meter and lowering the carbon dioxide meter. So the education player is the main reader of the game. I try to get the roles to match up with what would be realistic for it. And so if you want to grab the top resource card there and read our setup for us.
All right, this is resource card number 14. Here's a little background information. One of the ethical dilemmas of global climate change is individual versus community. An example of this dilemma is the desire of an individual chemical company to make profits and employ workers, balanced by the desire of surrounding communities to avoid toxic chemicals from those companies. Chemical companies build a wide variety of different products that we use in our everyday lives. Poisonous chemicals are often required in the manufacturing of products, and it can be difficult to contain those chemicals so that they don't pollute the environment. People want the products made by chemical companies, but they also don't want their groundwater polluted by chemicals. True. Those chemicals can give people cancer and other diseases. So we have 3 discussion questions here. The first one, I'll just kind of read through all of them.
Go for them, yep.
What penalties do you think companies face when they poison groundwater? That's a good question. Why do you think the companies resist these penalties? Would you accept losing your smartphone if it meant that groundwater wouldn't get poisoned?
Bear with me.
I like my smartphone. But I also don't want, right? Trouble.
Right.
Would you accept an increase in the cost of your smartphone instead? You have 5 minutes to discuss.
So that last question is kind of our hinge question for this, because it's we want to try to show students that there can be balance points for things.
I kind of just want to go my
level
right way up because you just hit me in my smartphone.
Right, and I don't hold back, on any of the issues that are especially significant discussion points for them as well. And so part of my role as the educator walking around the room as they're playing the game is to try to interject some additional questions, because different questions work for different kids, and finding that question that'll suck somebody into the discussion, that sort of becomes my role as the educator. And so after we have our discussions, I should probably mention that the research player is the timer, because measurement. Okay. And so we try to get all the roles matching something that would be realistic for it. So we would discuss this for 5 minutes on the timer, and then we all have 3 discussion cards, throwing things all over the place, where we're going to rate our discussions in terms of their quality, and then this is an opportunity for me to model for them, what does quality discussion look like? What are we shooting for? Well, we're looking for everybody having a voice. We're looking for us discussing as thoroughly as we can, and so I remind them of our critical thinking standards of depth and breadth and logic is going to be the rules that we have for this. And on the back of every discussion card, there's some tips and concerns. So I'm sort of just addressing the social emotional challenge of being 14 years old and having to have a respectful discussion with someone. So I'll just read one of each of them real quick. So for a discussion tip, are your ideas reasonable and grounded in facts? Is a question that I want them to ask themselves.
I don't need to be grounded in facts.
Right. You do, actually. But that's something that I want that right.
Job.
Well, exactly.
No,
to what extent, should everybody? And then a caution. Here's just a great one for everyone. Are you criticizing the idea and not the person? And these questions are all phrased positively, as in are you doing something positive? Are you doing something positive? Are you doing something positive? And these are all tips and cautions that we discuss before we play. Now, how do we rate our discussions? Well, you pick the card. I'm going to rate our discussion. Okay, so you put it face down.
Oh.
And then 1, 2, 3, flip.
Yeah.
And great discussion, right? And so
you're enjoying it.
Right, it's majority rules. And so if you could grab that resource card discussion rewards, all of the rewards for the discussions are linked to what might be realistic rewards for people discussing these things.
Yeah, good.
So you mentioned that we were resource card 14, right?
Yes.
So we turn to 14. We had a great discussion. We have a large reward. Well, government's going to get for money, and public's going to be getting for money because government is going to be the group that is going to have to manage the regulations for industry, and public is the group that has the voice in preventing pollution in that regard. Okay. And so as I walk around, another thing that I do is that I have my ear out for whenever they're finishing up discussions and getting rewards, and I'll ask them, why do you think public gets the money reward for this?
Sure.
So as they're going around, so we would get money.
And what an interesting visual cue for you, as an educator trying to manage, is to when you
I know exactly where they are.
It's time for you to go over and ask those questions and have that dialogue at that time.
So we're getting a bunch of money.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Education, no surprise, doesn't get anything.
Money is money. It has to be kept within a role because I'm trying to encourage them to well, do you see companies except for charity work just giving away money? Do you just give away money to people that you see? Realistically, in our society, we keep our money compartmentalized so that individuals have to make a choice. Do you want to contribute to this particular goal?
We're going to allocate those funds to.
Yep.
Addressing this issue.
And so then we get it this concept of saving money and and so there's economics involved with this as well, Should we hoard our money? Well, maybe that isn't the best plan either, when we could contribute to a goal. So the next step in the game is we draw goal cards, which the goal cards have a picture of the Earth on them.
Okay. The goal
and every round
that the Earth does not end up catastrophic loss.
So you draw 2 new goal cards at the beginning of each round. This one is 19 geothermal energy, and this one is 20 centralized communities. What we're going to do is we're going to get an opportunity to read about these potential goals in the goal card booklet.
Who would typically read this? Is this education?
Goal card. I think that public might be on reading goals for that one because they'll be contributing largely. And so what's interesting about goals for the game is that I sort of have a fog of war element here, which for those of you who are not familiar with games, fog of war is you have to make a decision because you don't know what all the outcomes are going to be for things. So there is a little bit of guesswork that is involved here. But as we delve into the goal, we'll notice that the game sort of gives us hints as to where we might get advantages. Okay. So you want to read geothermal energy as a potential goal for us?
Wind and solar power are not the only options for clean renewable fuel. Some locations on Earth are close to energy resources within the Earth itself. The heat energy produced by magma near the crust can heat homes directly, or heat water to turn it to steam to turn turbines and make electricity. Exactly what burning coal does. Geothermal power has the advantage of no environmental cost and is virtually unlimited energy supply. The downside is that it is only available in very limited places on Earth.
And the subtext for this particular goal is that the unit before our global climate change unit in natural science is our natural resources unit, in which we have another game that we play in which we take on the role of a mayor making decisions as to what energy sources to produce locally for our city. So the natural resources game leads naturally into the global climate change game. So a student reading this knows exactly what we're talking about here, but is learning about geothermal energy, a form of energy that we didn't discuss during that unit.
And bringing prior knowledge from a, we'll say, local or regional context into the context of the global and these agencies, our stakeholders that are trying to address this. So goal costs and predicted outcomes.
Yeah, so we can pursue this goal at 3 different levels. And the long and short of it is that the different levels cost different amounts. The bigger goal you work towards, the more time it might take to complete, but also the bigger rewards that you get, but also the biggest cost. So part of this is like a cost-benefit analysis sort of thing. And on every goal card, it says small, medium, and large. And then there's also a number in parentheses on each goal card, which shows how many rounds it's going to take for us to complete. So just for fun, let's say that we pursued this goal at large. Go large or go
big,
home, right? Okay. So we would pay our 8 money to... We're going to clip off this goal at large. It's going to take us 3 rounds to complete it, but check this out. If we complete this goal, we're going to lower that sink source meter a medium amount, And we're also going to get some special rewards. We're going to like sort of look ahead here in a second. But the way we manage this, so this game board I got from Amazon, this is actually half of the game board that you can purchase really cheap on Amazon. So you can see it's just sort of like a classics game board. This is half of it. I cut it in half and use stickers to produce a goal tracking board. And all these numbers mean is that when you purchase a goal, you throw it on start. And then there's a part every round that allows you to shift it forward. And when this one gets to 3, we get the rewards. So let's fast forward and see what would happen when we get the rewards for this. So if you turn to the back of that booklet, there's a separate section for goal card 19.
Do we know this when
you don't know it ahead of time, but this is a good time for us to point out that every role has a special ability.
Oh my.
And the research player's special ability is that they can spend money to look up the rewards of a goal in advance. Government's special action is that they can cancel the effect of a disaster card. And so each role has their own little special ability that they can bring into it. So if we completed goal 19, what will we get?
Well, we're going to sync our source by -6, which is
That's huge, right? So we would go all the way down here.
Industry gets +2 AP, as does public and research. So we actually would recoup 6 of the 8 we spent.
Exactly. And so there, you can create new industries by working on problems. And here in Nebraska, the wind industry is probably the best example of that. Also using animal waste and sucking the gases off of the animal waste is an example where farmers are recouping a lot of their money back because they're essentially selling electricity back to the electric company. And so, you may end up recouping a lot of your money. And the idea behind it is that I want to reward students for going through this problem-solving process and showing them that, hey, there are positive outcomes for this. Now, that's basically a game round because the way that a game round ends is you do 2 things. You look at the sync source meter, whatever number it says, so we would go up 4. So you're going to go up for like a couple rounds before you start to get it to go down. And then you just move the game round meter to the next one, and then the process repeats itself. And so once we have the time to prep this, students get into it pretty well and get into the discussions and get into making the rewards, and they're like, yeah, we got a total victory. They really get into it, And so
like we just celebrated.
Right.
And we're not even necessarily
playing the game, right? Yeah. Right? We did it.
Saving the world here.
We did it. We did it,
really
exactly.
Fun.
Now, this is a good opportunity for me to point out, I think, that flexibility has been a huge positive aspect of doing this as well, because
also personalized learning element.
Because the biggest thing that I learned in the first year that I did this game is that the game mechanics, I mean, this is a pretty complex game. Let's just be honest.
Sure.
Not everybody is into board games, okay? And part of my job of the educator needs to be to just let go, always learning first, always flexibility first. So even though I'm really into games, I'm wearing my educator hat when I'm in the classroom. And as educator, my feelings about games is ancillary to what's going on in the classroom. So the biggest thing that I learned playing this game the first year was that there were students who, like, I could tell from their body language and, what was going on, that they just weren't feeling the mechanics. And a student proposed to me, can we just do the discussions and not do the other aspects of the game? And my response was, slight pause, yes.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of this, for us to be discussing societal concerns around global climate change, because teachers in the audience may wonder, what does the assessment look like for this? So the assessment is an essay in which they write about what are our biggest concerns, what do you think would be effective problem-solving means, and how much would you be willing to compromise in order to work towards these goals. So this is all a formative experience for them, preparing them to ultimately write about what they feel would be the way that we need to start to tackle this problem.
Gosh, and the part of my brain that's wired to love games and education, and we didn't talk about this at the top of the podcast, but Michael and I had a chance to co-lead. We have a Choice PLC rotation at the high school, and ours was on games and education and breaking down the difference between gamification versus game-based learning, which I think this certainly has components of both. But,
absolutely.
But I love the game-based aspect of this, to get back to your earlier point that, we need to be educators and care about that content first. And as much as it's great to have engagement and the energy that comes with all that, and I would never say, if you have the option of doing things that are exactly one-to-one comparable, go with the thing that's got more engagement, right? In terms of just the academic benefit of it, because you are going to just see so much a greater investment. But I love the way this is constructed in order to not only bring that piece to it, but then also really puts you into some very real-world, authentic learning experiences in a game. But like you said too, if you're not feeling it, you don't have to do that.
They're the ones who should have the power to make decisions about what's going to be best for their learning within the frameworks that we set up.
And a game educator that I respect a lot, Paul Dervasi, that talks about that a game. If you are going to create a game for your class, it is worth considering and aspiring to that the student has to sign up to play. Yeah. That you're not forced into actually, which is a challenging thing to do sometimes. And so that's, I would applaud you for your sensibility to say, it isn't about the game. It's about that dialogue, and it's about learning. And so whatever works best for you. But I would imagine even if I was off to the side, I would probably at some point, maybe that's just me, but I can't imagine a lot of people take that option to just sit and talk. But okay, so I'm going to ask some of the questions that I'm sure, or try to ask some of the questions that I'm sure people are considering at this point. When did you first start this? And there's an evolution that comes to anything instructional practices in general. And so how long did it take for that to sort of marinate in your brain? We get our first iteration, and now we're at a place where I can just kind of go to the shelf. I'm sure you do, and just roll this thing out, and it goes. So talk about really that being born as a practice in your class.
All this started with me wanting to take a holistic topic and have a holistic learning experience for it. Traditionally, in science education, global climate change has been very data focused, and there isn't anything wrong with that. We do want data to drive everything, and if we look at some of the resource cards have graphs on them that we want students to be thinking about and looking for trends. But that's only one facet of solving a complex societal problem. And so I was thinking it over, I have X amount of time in my curriculum. Can I pull off something awesome? That was my ultimate goal. And so I had heard about a grant that was available through Teaching and Learning. And so I was able to use that grant to buy components, build components, and to get the time to be able to work on it in a summer. I didn't need to put 100 hours into it, but I put 100 hours into it, okay? And I want to just tell people in the audience, you don't have to put 100 hours into something in order for students to have a great experience.
Sure.
We've talked about in our gamification and games-based learning PLC how it can be something that it could be like a substitution, like for math at elementary, you bring a math game in and play just like if it's indoor recess, if it's storming or something like that, versus all the way up to creating a big experience. Like the first thing that comes to mind is that social studies has been doing large role-playing games like this for decades. UN games are sort of a staple of a lot of high school social studies classrooms, and that's like the level of complexity that we're talking about here. And so I worked over the course of that summer to develop all the game components. Part of the reason why it took me so long is because I hand laminated everything, because heck, if I'm not going to have these components are in great shape. And it's now been 4 years that I've been running the game in the class, and so everything is really held up. And so it was really an opportunity for me to take something that I loved in my personal life, games, and meld it with something that I love, curriculum design, and seeing the learner's eyes pop up when they accomplish something, and melding it all into a great experience for them.
Well, and so I'm going to bring up a couple points. As you're kind of talking there, I think that if you think, gosh, 100 hours, that's a lot. But you said this has worked for 4 years.
Yep.
So now let's just kind of think about the long-term run of this. We're really saying maybe about 25 hours, that you would have otherwise maybe put into redesigning or tinkering with something that, you just invested it all on the front end. Personalized learning, we see that a lot where oftentimes when you give students control of pace, then that just means that on the front end, a lot of things have to be ready. But then when it actually comes time to implement, whether it's a game or a personalized learning unit, your lesson planning goes way down.
It does.
And that frees up time for you to do other things like continue to grade, and get those other responsibilities out of the way, or just to be present and be able to walk around and ask questions and not necessarily be tied to the front or, to something that, and the energy that you experience. I'm going to bring up two parts here. One, melding your own passion with for outside of school with your passion for school,
right,
makes things really just enjoyable and fun. Like in my own personal game that I've developed, it had a very heavy video component because I like video.
Right.
And so I was very energized to take those two loves and kind of like bring them together in a way that made for a unique learning experience.
Kids know when adults are excited about things.
Absolutely. And I think that then that would be my second point, that energy and excitement is contagious in a way that you start to then be able to see them pick up, oh wow, this is something new. Look at all these pieces and things. I mean, I'm excited. Just
I get to be the banker,
right.
Which ends up melding into a more rich experience for them. They end up having a richer experience, even if that wasn't their intent at the start.
Sure.
So,
and if you as an adult, think back to the learning experiences that you went through that were your favorite, or at least ones that you still remember, right? Because there are a ton of days that I've forgotten. But I can remember some, just significant, like we played home ec and consumer economics like class. Here's your fake money, right? And you get to like, wait, we're going to do auction of these different items and just talked about like, purchasing. And you remember those days and those experiences is you're kind of sitting there having an authentic learning experience that was unique. And so I just think there's a lot of benefits to it. And so if that 100 hours seems like a lot, again, maybe it doesn't need 100 hours.
Right.
But being able to invest that intently on the front end usually makes things go well.
That I would argue that
energy.
Yeah, that's an axiom of curriculum design, that the more premeditated effort you put in ahead of time, the more you front load your effort in making sure that things are going to be right. Now, and that's another element of this. This was play tested in a rough form before I finalized it by both educators and students. Okay. So checking to make sure that everything was working out and tweaking everything before I went to the final product. And then I didn't get to the final product, realized that there was something that I didn't like and had to completely reinvent the wheel. Taking that time to have 2 focus groups with this. And then going from there was a real positive thing to do. So,
and when is that? That's not typical practice, right?
It is not.
It's where you go, okay, it's Tuesday. Today's lesson's a big deal. I'm gonna need
Well, and that's the distinction of when you get a teaming philosophy to work at Westside High School. When teams work, it's because teams are excited to go all in on something and to make it everyone's rather than to make it mine. Make it mine is kind of the enemy of curriculum design, and
I think so too. So. Well, I'm just going to say thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for the 100 hours
it was
that you
fun.
put into this on behalf of our, students as well, because that's just incredible. And grateful for the opportunity to pick your brain about this and understand the inner workings of it. I've been in the class and seen them play this too, and I know that it did have a great buzz, just energy, to the room when you did that. And we'll look forward to kind of hearing more, stories. As I know you have other games and things.
Absolutely,
next year as some personalized stuff gets off the ground.
And I have my own personalized project that I'm going to be working on this summer.
What I was going to bring up. Give us a quick preview of what we might hear next time we see you on the website or the channel.
My approach to curriculum design has always been, what's the weakest section of the course, and how can we unweak it? How can we strengthen it? Okay, and so one aspect
throw money at it.
Yeah, right.
No.
One aspect of quarter one that has always been a concern for me is some of the coolest content in quarter one for natural science is very abstract, which that is plate tectonics. And every individual component that we have of that, there's nothing wrong with it in and of itself, but there isn't a lot of choice with it. And I have this gut instinct that we could get even more a great experience out of the plate tectonics section if we have students making more choices about how they want to learn it, because the material is all out there. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited to work to planning some more aspects of this, whether it's the products that they're producing or the choices that they have to learn things or station work I want to work on a little bit. So that's what I'm going to be working on this summer.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your passion and your time that you dedicate to making great learning experiences for our students in our district and serving them. And it's just really awesome. It's a lot of fun. So really appreciate it.
Happy to be involved.